my perspective as a municipal government official, city manager here, I want to comment on a couple bills that didn't make it through the legislature. And I urge our legislators as they go back to make sure they make it all the way over the goal line this next year. One of those is legislation pending to increase the state's support for municipal roads and bridges. There's been tremendous progress over the last decade from the new legislature that came and recognized how important our infrastructure is and how deficient ODOT counties were with responding and how we've been falling behind. It's really a public safety issue. We all put our lives on the line. It's an economic development issue. And the major fiscal issues, so they addressed that for ODOT, they addressed it for the counties, but municipalities' issues were not addressed at the time. So we've got legislation pending. There's going to be an interim study that looks at increasing the state's support for municipal roads and bridges, because 53% of lane miles driven in Oklahoma occur within the borders of cities and towns. And we're all in this together. We think it's important, so we look for their support as we try to work forward on that. Secondly, there's legislation pending to change the amount the Oklahoma Tax Commission charges to collect cities and towns' sales taxes. They will acknowledge that they're charging about 2 times what it costs to collect it. And they now have a new computer system and other things, and so they are able to charge much less. But there's legislation that was working its way through, which didn't make it. There would be an impact on the general fund. It's about, I believe, about $10 million. But it's simply wrong for local cities and towns to be subsidizing the tax commission to collect the income tax and other things. And there's a real legal question whether that can actually occur. It needs to be addressed, and I challenge and request our legislators to get back to make sure that gets across. That's just simply not right. Those dollars should be back here employing additional police officers, funding streets and the needs. So, and the tax commission is in full agreement on that. A recommendation in AE to funding the state emergency fund. It's horrendous what occurred in Moore. We saw terrific tornado damage here in our neighbors Broken Arrow and Reno. In terms of the tornadoes, just devastating. It's hard to even still come to grips with. It's only good fortune that the legislature was still in session with a couple days left that they were able to tap into the emergency portion of the state's rainy day fund. The fund was full, and there's a portion that we as voters elected in 1985 to set aside for emergencies. There's another fund that it's called the Governor's Emergency Fund, or the State Emergency Fund, which is what you use to match FEMA. FEMA comes in and would fund 75% of the expenses for all this debris removal, etc., only on those that reach presidential declaration stage. They don't fund just anything. Very hard threshold. That leaves 25% to be funded by the state and local governments, and that's split. So there's 12.5% by the state, 12.5% is borne by the local municipalities. Well, for several years, the legislature did not put any money aside for that emergency type situation. They got behind. So back during the ice storm and all that damage, municipalities were having to increase fees, borrow money from banks in order to clean up all the debris and wait for the state to honor its commitment. There was no money in the account. No money in the account. Governor Fallon exercised leadership, came in and said, let's start. Went and got all the bills, the backlog paid. But unfortunately, as we've seen, we lead the state in a number of natural disasters. Now we're going to see them again. We saw them. Wildfires is probably the next thing. But it only makes good sense to take some money out of the back pocket, put it in the front pocket so it's more accessible by the government, only for qualified emergencies. And I would suggest that they pre-fund the emergency fund. Finally, with the speaker bench here, especially, I just want to remind legislators to watch out for unfunded mandates. Those things can bite you when you come back home and find out, oh my goodness, we passed that, and that's it. We know we're going to see them again. We saw them. Wildfires is probably the next thing. But it only makes good sense to take some money out of the back pocket, put it in the front pocket so it's more accessible by the government, only for qualified emergencies. And I would suggest that they pre-fund the emergency fund. Finally, with the speaker bench here, especially, I just want to remind legislators to watch out for unfunded mandates. Those things can bite you when you come back home and find out, oh my goodness, we passed that, and that's an unfunded mandate back on our local government. Where are they going to get the money? Where are they going to have to either cut services or increase fees. And there's legislation that Speaker sponsored called the Municipal Fiscal Impact Act that calls for a fiscal impact analysis to be done on legislation that might have a negative fiscal impact, just so legislators know what the cost is before they leave. And sometimes that gets overlooked. So I always like to highlight that, especially in Speaker Bench's presence here. We've got tons of things going on in the city of Bixby. We'll have a newsletter hitting your mailboxes, an unfunded mandate back on our local government. Where are they going to get the money? Where are they going to spend July 1st, as we prepare to celebrate our Independence Day. And lots of information there on private money. I know there's probably a few questions in the House. I'm going to turn it back to our moderator, Crystal. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you.